me, and he got his certificate and his patch. And I said, is it me or is it really tough? I thought it was very difficult because though it's 270 miles, with all the backtracking, you're probably going to hike at least 400. You can't always do a loop or a point to point. There's a lot of backtracking. And I said, can you compare it to anything else you've done? And he said, look, I've hiked the Adirondack 46. He goes, dude, that was way harder than the 46. He and I agree that hiking the 46 twice would maybe equal the challenge of hiking every trail in
Interesting.
Adirondack High Peaks. And it's interesting. I have had some people contact me and they said, yeah, I think I've hiked all the trails. I go, real? I go, well, the list is in the back of one of my books. Just get your hands on a book and, borrow for somebody, check out the list. And then they look at it and they're like, oh my God, I haven't heard of half of these. I go, yeah, there's stuff way out in Western High Peaks. There's stuff along Long Lake and then all the way up in the northeast corner on Cascade Mountain and everything in between. Just a lot of little nooks and crannies of trails. Now, what's very interesting is we've only had 2 people recorded as hiking the High Peaks trails. Again, fewer than 300 miles. But if you look at New Hampshire and White Mountain National Forest, that trail system is well over 1,000 miles. It's probably close to about 1,800 miles of hiking when you're done. And dozens of people have done that. So it's just very interesting that people will go down their way to hike almost 2,000 miles in the White Mountains, but that pursuit of trails really hasn't caught on in the Adirondacks. I think we're more the peak bagging types out here.
Oh, I definitely think that's more of the people you get outside on the trails. So this is basically redlining more or less the High Peaks Wilderness area. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, precisely. And perhaps somebody will correct me. I believe that term comes from the White Mountains because the Appalachian Mountain Club maps trails are in red.
Okay. Oh, got it. Fascinating.
Yes.
So now you've also hiked a 110-mile High Peaks Wilderness loop. When I read that, I said to myself, I have no idea what that loop is. So where did you go to do this loop? Because I'm quite curious.
Yeah, this was really fun. I hiked this 10, 15 years ago. And as I'm sure you've got by now, I just kind of like to do my own thing, design my own routes. And I was looking at a map of High Peaks Wilderness and I said, wow, I don't think anybody's ever hiked around the border of High Peaks Wilderness. So that's what I did. I started in Elk Lake, parked my car at the trailhead there, and then I went clockwise. So I went up to Four Corners between Marcy and Skylight. I went down to Colden. I took the Opalescent Trail down to the trailhead that people use to access Mount Allen, or excuse me, Allen Mountain. I went through Preston Ponds, and then I hiked south, I guess to past Duck Hole. Now I'm on the Northville Placid Trail. I went around the base of the Sewards. I came out at Racket Falls. I walked the Corey's Road back up towards the Sewards. And then I got back on the Northville Placid Trail at Duck Hole and followed that north. I think I went back through Preston Ponds. So now the route kind of looks like a pair of eyeglasses. Went up to the Adirondack Lodge. So I went up through Indian Pass, Wallface Cliff, up to the Adirondack Lodge, traversed east until I entered what was technically the Dix Mountain Wilderness area, did the slide climb up to the top of Dix, and then descended back down to Elk Lake.
Wow. Now, how long did that take?
4 or 5 days,
Okay.
probably 4.
And you just camped wherever you stopped for the night, I would imagine. Although I guess there's lean-tos and whatnot at some places in that route.
Yeah, I'm the type of guy who probably no surprise here. I just like to go out and bivouac in the woods,
Sure.
kind of away from everybody. I know I stayed at the lean-to near Indian Pass because it was pouring rain and
Hmm.
just happened to reach the lean-to at sundown. But yeah, just kind of crashed to wherever. It was 110 miles. It there was quite a bit of climbing. I think it had about 25,000 vertical feet. But it was very enjoyable, and I think I did it in September under sunny skies for 4 days straight. So just great timing.
Got it. Got it. So we've talked a lot about your hiking experience now. Now let's move on to your writing, since I know that's an enormous element of your life. So far, you've written a number of books. We have Through Hiker's Guide to America, Blue Line to Blue Line, which is the TransADK book. There's The History Inside the Blue Line, which is a toponym book about the Adirondacks. There's My Adirondacks. There's Among the Cloud Splitters, which is a toponym book about the High Peaks Wilderness area. The Cradle of the Union, toponym book about Albany. And then The Color Remote. So now that I've said toponym a number of times, take me through what exactly toponym research is and how you got into doing that. Because since we've spoken about it, I've found myself wondering and starting to look at to see what this is in my world. So explain to people what toponym research is, and then they'll understand.
Well, toponym research, and like what happened to you, just a general interest in toponyms is addictive. So the field of study is called onomastics. So onomastics is a study of how things get their names. And it could be Haagen-Dazs ice cream. It could be the state you live in. It could be the name of your local college, whatever. And there are several more specific fields of study under the umbrella of onomastics. And one of them is toponyms. And toponyms addresses natural features. So Mount Marcy, why is it called Mount Marcy? And Elk Lake, why is it called Elk Lake? And Extract Brook, why is it called Extract Brook? And I got into this in 2011. So I had just through hiked and established the TransADK route. I'm writing the guidebook. And my style of writing isn't that typical dry, we'll take a left here and cross this stream here. I like to sprinkle in historical tidbits. And some of those historical tidbits are just direct toponym information. But what I was doing is I was putting too much of this information in the guidebook. So when I had my editor read over it, she goes, I get the guidebook part, but she goes, Erik, you've got all this toponym stuff. And I think through hikers are either going to get annoyed or confused or both. I said, all right, good point, good point. Let's bring it back down to a pure guidebook. But all the information that I pulled out of that manuscript, I had so much toponym information that I could produce another book or two books or three books. And that's where it all began.
Sure. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I could definitely understand reading a guidebook and just wanting to just give me the facts, give me the facts. But at the same time, I am the type of person that I love fun facts. I love this is this is called this because of that. Or I personally love that, but I could understand your editor's perspective on that regard. So take me through Among the Cloud Splitters, which is a toponym book about the High Peaks Wilderness. I feel like a lot of people who would be listening to this podcast would find that book in particular fascinating. So you go through the High Peaks Wilderness and basically talk about how everything got its name. Is that a good assumption?
That's it.
That's
so, yeah, toponyms are interesting in two regards, and that is behind every name there's a story, and the story is usually pretty good. And that's just a fact. I don't really ever stumble across the story behind a toponym and I'm like, oh, that's kind of lame. It's usually a very good story. Somebody died there, or somebody explored it as a surveyor, or there was an almost fatal accident and the person came out unscathed, or there was some kind of dramatic hunting chase there. There's just countless good stories behind these. The other interesting aspect of toponyms, especially in the high peaks where people hike all the time, is its obvious history. So people might climb Street Mountain or the Wolf Jaws or Skylight or even Marcy, the highest peak in the state. They don't give it a second thought. Why would this thing be called Street Mountain? Or why would this be called Indian Pass Brook? It's kind of like when I decoded Albany's street names. They have 800 street names, and I decoded them all. That was in Cradle of the Union. And these are the streets that people live on, and the postal workers deliver mail there, and your kids go trick or treating on, and your grandparents live there. But again, nobody ever thinks about this stuff. Why is it called such and such? So that's the question I asked when I looked at the High Peaks. High Peaks Wilderness Area has about 224 named features, and I went in and historically decoded all of them. Now, there were a couple, probably less than 10%, nobody knows. And when people ask me, well, how do you do toponym research? Where do you look? I have a one-word answer. The answer is everywhere. And if I didn't find out why it's called what it's called, the reason behind this name, it is lost to history, and that's okay. But yeah, among the cloud splitters covers every name feature in High Peaks Wilderness: the streams, the ponds, the ridge lines, the rivers, and of course the peaks.
So it's funny you say that, because I was going to say, how do you find this information? And you answered it. You have to look everywhere. So you're looking far and wide for any sort of information you can. Fascinating. And also, you said people don't tend to, they're hiking Marcy, they're hiking Skylight Street, whatever. They don't really hear the name, and they don't really care where it comes from until the idea of this subject is brought up to them. So we started talking, I don't know, a week ago. And since you brought this up to me and introduced me to this subject, it has very quickly become in my brain whenever I see anything now. It's really funny how quickly it can become an interest. And I feel like once that topic and subject is introduced to someone, they're now going to constantly need to know, why is this street called this? Or especially when you see like a weird name or whatever.
Right. And I'm thankful you didn't say it. I have had a couple of people tell me, they go, Erik, you've absolutely ruined hiking for me. I used to just kind of stroll through the woods, la-di-da, not a care in the world. But now I'm always thinking, Nundageo Ridge. Why is it called that?
Right.
Little Crow. Did somebody see a crow, or was it the person with the last name of Crow? I don't know what's going on here. And I certainly got people's gears turning on this, which
absolutely.
is
For
great.
sure.
It's fun stuff.
It is fun. So now let's take me through a couple names in the High Peaks Wilderness area. Any fun stories from how certain things got their names, or certain places that you were like, that was hard to find, but you got the story, you figured it out?
Yeah, let's see some interesting ones. Well, there are certain different classifications of names. Some places they call transfer names. So a good example of a transfer name in the High Peaks is Klondike Notch. Klondike Notch is, I think, east of, it's kind of northeast of South Meadow. And probably somebody was hiking up there in the winter, and they said, oh my God, it's freezing. It's probably as cold as the Klondike. So we get quite a few transfer names. America is overwhelmed with transfer names. So pretty much any town that you see in the U.S. that starts with the word new, then it is a transfer name. So I recently moved to Colorado from around Albany, and they have New Berlin. It's probably the new version of Berlin, Germany. So anyway, we have some transfer names. We have quite a few descriptive names. I'm a big fan of descriptive names, and the High Peaks has a high concentration of them. Skylight, Saddleback, Haystack is a good one. Probably my favorite High Peaks place name is Gothics. Now, Gothics is just an amazing looking mountain.